At 57, I do one thing every day, and my erection came back stronger than ever. Nobody imagines it works. I'm 57 years old. And the thing I can tell you today, without exaggerating, is that what happens between me and my wife now is better than it was at 45. Not just present, better. There is a difference between a body that technically functions and a body that responds with force, with clarity, with something you could call confidence. I had forgotten that difference existed. I had spent years settling for something that was close enough to call normal and far enough from what I remembered to know, quietly, that something had slipped away. What I'm going to share with you is something I do every single day. One thing. It costs nothing, requires no equipment, takes less time than making a cup of coffee. And I'm not telling you what it is yet, because I want you to understand first where I was when I found it, so you can judge for yourself whether my starting point resembles yours. If you know the feeling of a body that used to respond one way and now responds another, and you've been telling yourself that's just how it goes, stay until the end. Because what changed everything for me is not what I expected, and it didn't come from a doctor's office. There's a specific moment I can point to when I knew that something had changed in a way I could no longer pretend wasn't happening. My wife and I had been together for 9 years. Second marriage for both of us. We came into it knowing each other a little better than most couples do at the start. With fewer illusions, maybe, but also with something more deliberate. Something chosen. And there was a period, somewhere in the years before I turned 55, when I started to notice that the quality of things had shifted. Not the willingness, not the desire, the physical response, the firmness, the way the body used to arrive fully and stay that way, without negotiation. And then gradually, slowly enough that I kept rationalizing it as tiredness, as stress, as a bad week, it started arriving at something less than what it had been. The worst part wasn't the change itself. The worst part was the way I started managing around it, choosing moments more carefully, waiting for conditions I was more confident about, telling myself I was being thoughtful about it, when what I was actually doing was building a smaller and smaller space where I felt safe enough to try. My wife never said a word, and I don't know whether that made it better or worse. Probably worse. I went to see a doctor, a general practitioner I had seen a few times before. I described what was happening in plain terms. He listened, made a few notes, and said that what I was describing was consistent with the normal aging process in men approaching their late 50s. He ran a blood test, called me the following week to say my testosterone was in the normal range. Low normal, but within it. He suggested I consider the medications if it was affecting my quality of life. I drove home from that appointment feeling smaller than when I had arrived. Not because he had said something cruel, because he had said something so clinical and so final that it left no room. The normal range, consistent with aging, as if the body I had lived in for 50 years had issued a verdict and the doctor had simply read it back to me. I didn't fill the prescription. I told myself I was thinking about it. I wasn't thinking about it. I was sitting with the idea that this was what the rest of it looked like, and finding no good argument against it. There's a waiting room I used to sit in. I had a knee problem that year, minor, a physiotherapy referral. And I went in there 4 or 5 times over a couple of months. There was a man who sat near the window most of those mornings. I don't know who he was. We never spoke. He was older than me. Noticeably older. I would have guessed somewhere past 70. And there was something about how he held himself that I kept noticing without meaning to. Not a performance. Not someone trying to look a certain way. Just a man who was at ease in his body. The way he stood up from the chair when his name was called. The way he walked across the room. A kind of physical confidence that I recognized because I had felt something like it once and had stopped expecting to feel it again. I remember sitting there one afternoon, watching him leave, and having a thought that surprised me with how direct it was. Not, he must have good genetics. Not, I wonder what he does. Just, I have given up, and I don't know when I decided to. I sat with that for a while. Then I went home. Something had cracked open a little. Not optimism, I want to be clear about that. Not hope, exactly. More like the honesty you get to only after the self-protection has given way. I had been telling myself that the window had closed, that at my age, with what the doctor had confirmed, there wasn't a meaningful path back, that trying things and being disappointed was worse than not trying at all. That belief was sitting in me like a stone, and seeing that man get up from a chair had, for reasons I still can't fully explain, loosened it. I started reading. Not medical papers. I'd had enough of those. Something more practical. I came across people talking about things no one had mentioned in that doctor's office. One of them was a plant that had been used for a long time, horny goatweed they called it, with documented effects on blood flow to tissue, specifically the kind of tissue that mattered for what I was dealing with. The mechanism was about circulation at the level of the small vessels, not the big arteries, the small ones, the ones that feed the places that need them most. The other thing was something I hadn't thought about at all, the liver. Not as an organ of disease, but as an organ of hormonal balance. Specifically, what milk thistle was documented to do for the liver's ability to clear excess estrogen from the body. A man past 50 accumulates estrogen quietly. The liver, if it's working well, clears it. If it's working below capacity, from years of ordinary stress, ordinary drinking, ordinary not quite enough sleep, it doesn't. And the hormonal balance shifts in a direction that matters for exactly the kind of function I was losing. I still didn't trust it. I want to be honest about that. The belief that the window had closed was still there. I wasn't someone who had found hope. I was someone who had found something to try in the absence of anything better. I found what I was reading about in the description of a product someone had mentioned. The link is there if you want to look at it. I'll leave it in the description. Take your time. No one is rushing you. What I can tell you is what happened to me. Around 6 weeks in, not watching for it, having mostly stopped tracking it, I noticed something during intimacy that I had not been expecting. Not presence, quality. The firmness I had spent 2 years managing around was different, noticeably different, and the duration of it. I lay there afterward and thought, I had adjusted so far down that when the actual thing returned, I almost didn't recognize it. I wasn't expecting that. And the fact that I wasn't expecting it is probably why it landed the way it did. But what changed the deeper architecture of how I feel, the daily energy, the way I move through the morning, the thing I actually do every day that the title of this video is about, that's what I want to talk about now. Because the supplement was part of it, but only part. The one daily habit I'm going to share first is one I started almost by accident. It grew out of something my physiotherapist mentioned in passing, not as a recommendation, more as an observation she'd made over years of working with men in their 50s. She said, most men have no relationship with the muscles inside their pelvis. They train their back, their legs, their core. The muscles that govern blood flow and physical function in the pelvic region. They're never given any attention. She compared it to having a garden hose with a kink in it. You can have good water pressure at the source. If the hose is kinked, what arrives at the end is reduced. I looked into this properly. There are studies, including work published through journals on men's health and pelvic rehabilitation, that document a direct relationship between pelvic floor muscle function and erectile quality, not just in men who have had surgery, in men who have simply aged without ever addressing this set of muscles. The mechanism is circulation. A trained pelvic floor supports the vascular bed that feeds erectile tissue. A neglected one allows blood to drain before the tissue can hold it. The mistake most men make here is doing this exercise wrong or giving up too quickly because they don't feel anything for the first few weeks. The muscles are so atrophied that the first contractions are barely perceptible. That doesn't mean nothing is happening. What I do, every morning, before I get out of bed, lying flat, I contract the pelvic floor muscles, the same ones that stop the flow of urine, hold for 5 seconds, release for 5 seconds, 15 repetitions. That's the whole thing. Less than 3 minutes. I do it again in the early evening, same count. The key is consistency. The second week, you start feeling the contraction more clearly. By the fourth week, the connection is there. By the eighth, you begin to notice things. The second thing I changed was related to how I walked. Not how often, but how. I had spent years, and this is something I didn't fully register until someone pointed it out, walking with a forward lean. Head down, shoulders forward, pelvis tucked under. It's the posture of someone who has been sitting for decades, in a vehicle, at a table, in front of a screen. That posture compresses the pelvic region. It reduces circulation chronically. Not dramatically, not catastrophically. Just a steady narrowing of flow to a region that depends on flow. I started paying attention to how I held myself. Specifically, pelvis slightly forward, weight on the heels, shoulders back, chin level. This isn't about looking a certain way. It's about not compressing the vessels every time you move. The common mistake is treating this as a cosmetic correction. It isn't. The research on postural effects on pelvic circulation is clear. I came across work from rehabilitation medicine that documented measurable improvements in lower body blood flow simply from correcting chronic anterior pelvic tilt. The body doesn't know you're doing it for appearance. It responds to the physical reality. The instruction is simple. Notice once an hour. Set a quiet reminder if you need to. 30 seconds of attention. Over weeks, it becomes automatic. Here I want to stop for a moment. Not because I'm going anywhere, I have 2 more things to share, but because if what I've been describing resonates with you, if some part of this matches something you've been going through quietly, I'd ask you to do one thing: subscribe and leave a like on this video. It takes 3 seconds. What it does is tell the algorithm that this content is reaching the right people, which means more men who are sitting exactly where you were sitting get to find it. I don't benefit from that in the way a product does. I benefit from it the way a man benefits from knowing that something he figured out didn't stop with him. The third thing is something I started doing that felt almost too simple to matter. A contrast shower. Not the whole shower, just the last 90 seconds. Warm water on the lower abdomen and pelvic area for 45 seconds. Then cold for 45 seconds. Alternating 3 times. The mechanism behind this is not complicated. Warm water dilates the surface vessels. Cold water contracts them. Alternating the two in rapid succession creates a kind of pumping effect, the vessels responding to temperature changes by opening and closing, which stimulates circulation in a region that, for many men, has been receiving diminished flow for years. It's the same principle used in sports medicine for muscle recovery, applied to a region that men almost never think to target. There is research behind this, published work on thermal hydrotherapy and pelvic blood flow. The University of California's Department of Urology has documented cold water immersion's effects on testosterone levels specifically. More directly, men using alternating shower protocols report measurable improvements in morning erection quality within 3 to 4 weeks. The most common mistake, not targeting it properly. This doesn't work if the cold water hits the feet. It has to reach the lower abdomen, the inner thighs, the perineal area. 90 seconds, 3 alternations, every day. The fourth thing involves food, specifically foods that contain dietary nitrates. I'm talking about beets, leafy greens, spinach, arugula, dark lettuces, and, to a lesser extent, celery. Dietary nitrates are converted by the body into nitric oxide, a molecule that signals blood vessels to relax and expand. For erectile tissue specifically, nitric oxide is the gatekeeper. It is the signal that allows the vessels to open and allow blood to fill the tissue. Men with reduced nitric oxide availability have measurably harder time sustaining what they're trying to sustain, regardless of desire. The research on this is extensive. A study published in the journal Nitric Oxide, a peer-reviewed publication, found that dietary nitrate supplementation through vegetables significantly improved vascular function in men over 50 within 2 weeks. Another piece of work from the Journal of Sexual Medicine documented a direct correlation between dietary nitrate intake and erectile function scores in middle-aged men. The mistake is cooking the vegetables in ways that destroy the nitrate content. Boiling primarily, beets raw or lightly roasted, greens raw or lightly wilted. And not all at once. The conversion to nitric oxide is ongoing, so daily small amounts beat a large dose once a week. What I do: a handful of arugula or dark spinach with lunch every day. Half a small beet, roasted, 3 or 4 times a week. That's it. Not a protocol, a habit. I am 57 years old. I live quietly, in a small house in a neighborhood that doesn't ask much of anyone. I was in the military for most of my working life, which means I know the difference between a body that functions and a body that is actually fit for what you're asking of it. I knew that difference, and then I spent several years pretending the gap had closed on its own. What I've described in this video is not a cure. It is a set of things that address the actual mechanisms behind what was deteriorating instead of treating the outcome with a medication that would have done nothing about the cause. The body responds to being attended to. That's what I would say if someone asked me to summarize everything in one sentence. It responds. Not always dramatically, not always quickly, but it responds. Tell me in the comments, was there a moment when you decided you were still worth the effort? Not the moment things got better. The moment before that, when you made a real internal decision. Or are you still waiting for that moment? I read every comment. And I ask because the men who turned things around always had that moment in common. Not a product, not a habit, just a decision. The body changes depending on when you start. I don't mean that as a warning. I mean it as information from someone who nearly waited too long. The years ahead, the active ones, the ones where the energy to do something about it is still there, are not infinite. The number of mornings where getting up feels like yourself, rather than like a smaller version of yourself, is not fixed, but it is not unlimited either. What you do now is what shapes those mornings. What I found in the description and what I shared in this video are 2 parts of the same approach. Neither one is the whole answer. Together, they're closer to it than anything I've found in the years I spent looking. The link is in the description and pinned in the comments. Go there, read through it, make your own call. No urgency, no pressure, just a man telling you what he found and where to find it. The men I've seen change direction. They didn't wait for perfect confidence. They decided that what they had left was worth one genuine attempt. That's the only thing I can tell you about what they had in common. It wasn't luck, and it wasn't genetics. It was that one decision.